and welcome to the Scrutiny Committee meeting of Melton Borough Council. Members are reminded that we will be using the audio-visual system this evening, and the meeting will also be streamed live on YouTube. There is a quick reference card on the desk in front of you, which provides instruction on how to use the basic speaking function on the microphone. Members are asked to physically raise their hands in the usual way to indicate they wish to speak, and to use their microphones when speaking for the benefit of all present. The microphone is live when the red light shows. Switch mobile phones to silent, please. Should anybody need to leave the room during the meeting, unless it is an emergency evacuation, when emergency exit should be used, please use the marked exit and entrance sign. I will now provide a reminder of the evacuation procedure. In the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, please leave by one of the 6 emergency exits around the sides of the chamber. Please assemble at the far side of the front car park, nearest to the park entrance. Officers will be on hand to assist persons who require any assistance. Public recording of the meeting. There is legislation that allows the public to film, record, or use social media at a council meeting. This must not be disruptive to the good order of the meeting, nor include any filming or recording of the public seating area. I confirm the following members are present and participating in this meeting. Councillors Prue Chandler, Jeannie Douglas, Chris Evans, Margaret Glancy, John Illingworth, Mel Stedman, and Jacob Wilkinson. We also welcome portfolio holder for governance, corporate governance and resources, Councillor De Burl, and portfolio holder for council homes and landlord services, Councillor Ronan Brown, as well as other members who have joined us in person this evening. In addition to this, we have the following Melton Borough Council officers in attendance. Chief Executive Ed de Coverley, Director for Housing and Communities Michelle Howard, Director for Corporate Services Dawn Garton, Director for Growth and Regeneration Pranali Paraka, Corporate Services Manager David Scott, Democratic Services Officers Sarah Evans and Helen Ainge. Joining us remotely is the Assistant Director for Governance and Democracy and Monitoring Officer Kieran Stockley, and Senior Democratic Services and Scrutiny Officer Adam Green. I'll just note that Councillor Elaine Holmes has just joined the meeting. Apologies for absence. I have received one apology from Councillor Posnett. Item 2, to confirm the minutes of the scrutiny meeting held on the 9th of November 2021. Have you all had a read through them? Could we have a proposer and a seconder that they're accurate? Councillor Wilkinson and Councillor Chandler. Declarations of interest. I invite members who wish to do so to make declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda for this meeting. Does anybody want to declare an interest? No, thank you. The Chief Executive will now provide an introductory presentation to the budget development process before handing over to the Director for Corporate Services to summarise these 3 draft reports on the agenda. The reports are draft cabinet reports and will be updated and finalised following feedback from this committee this evening. Members should note the reports are due to be presented to Cabinet on the 12th of February, and the reports will then be presented to Council for approval on the 24th. The presentation will be in 3 sections, and after each section, it is the intention that members of the committee can question officers who are in attendance or the portfolio holder should it be necessary. Item 4. I invite members to, oh no, we're going to Ed now for introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we've got a presentation which I'm hoping will be on the screen in a moment. Just looking to my colleagues. Yes, fabulous. Thank you. So we're very conscious you've got an awful lot of information in front of you this evening, obviously the detailed finance report. So we wanted to just give an introductory presentation just to set the scene really, and to point out some of the key aspects that you may want to consider as part of the discussion this evening. If you could move on to the next slide, please. So these are the areas that we're going to cover. I'm going to pick up the context and background to the strategy development, and then Dawn, as the chair has mentioned, will go through some of the details within those finance reports that you've got. Again, if you could move on to the next slide, please. So the starting point for any budget is about what it's going to facilitate. Obviously, the budget represents the resources this council commits, so we have to be clear on what we're trying to achieve with those resources. And the first point we look to is our corporate strategy. That's the strategy that this council has set, the members have set in terms of the aspirations and priorities that it wants us to deliver. So that's our starting point. And what we seek to try and facilitate is the resources to deliver that and to maintain the commitments we've made, and also maintain the quality of services that we want to and that members ask us to retain. Alongside that, we also have the financial challenge that we can't ignore, and we have to also consider how we make sure we manage financial stability of the organisation over the medium term, as well as ensuring that we are being efficient and also demonstrating value for money. Alongside that 4-year strategy that we also now have the facility and mechanism for an annual review, which we call the State of Melton debate. And we held the first one of those, you recall, back in October last year, which was an opportunity for members and officers to come together and look at how things were in Melton, look at some of the impacts arising from COVID, look at some of the demographic changes, look at some of the challenges that our place that we serve is facing, and also that the council may have itself, and to think about what things we needed to pay attention to as we started to develop the budget. And we've just summarised really succinctly the key themes that came out from that conversation. It was a very productive, helpful conversation. So issues around young people, issues around living and ageing well, so recognising we need to think about how we serve those two different demographics. A recurring theme we hear often around town centre promotion and also the wider place promotion. So thinking about how we link the rural offer of our place alongside the town. Increasingly a desire from members around climate change and environment, and how we bring to life the existing priority we have in our corporate strategy and how we start giving that some focus. And then something that's been a priority for certainly the last 2 years, a very big focus is around housing and the right location. Again, kind of very succinctly sums up what was quite an extensive discussion at the State of Melton debate. If you can move on to the next slide, please. The other aspect, as I touched on, is around financial sustainability. And there's a number of things that as an SLT and as officers, we look at alongside Cabinet and wider members to think about how we make sure this council is sustainable into the medium term. And there's a number of things we've listed there that we look at. Some are very tactical and some are more strategic. So for example, things like vacancy management is a tactical response, and it's a way of providing a short-term stop on funding or checkpoint on funding to make sure we can bridge any short-term gaps. So we used that last year, particularly when there's so much uncertainty arising from COVID, and we weren't clear on the level of funding we were going to get from government. We put stops on a number of vacancies to give us some breathing space. And actually, given that we outturned at the end of last year with a surplus position, that was helpful because it meant we were prudent in managing our resources. Clearly, we need to maximise our income, and we need to think about how we use our income to support our services. That's again one of the filters that we use when we look at our finances. Clearly, members have a role in scrutiny, but officers also, we will bring challenge and scrutiny to budgets to make sure that we aren't carrying any unnecessary fat or surplus that is no longer necessary. Sometimes budgets can roll forward and maybe were served a purpose 3-4 years ago, but have just carried on as a legacy. And so we do scrutinize that and try and make sure we draw those things out so we aren't carrying on unnecessary resources that we don't need. And then moving on to more strategic aspects. So asset development, certainly something that we've talked about a fair bit at the council. I think it was December 2020, the council approved the asset development programme, and we're keen. And I know there was some good discussion at the Scrutiny Task and Finish group about trying to get some pace and energy into that and seeing it come forward, because it is a real area where there is some potential for us to deliver some savings and to especially as well respond to the impacts arising from the pandemic as well. Linked to that is service transformation, because clearly we want to make sure we continue to deliver great services and that we are absolutely responding to the needs of our residents, supporting vulnerable people and meeting the objectives again within our corporate strategy. But we need to make sure we're doing that efficiently, we're getting rid of waste, and we're making sure we're delivering good customer experience and value for money. So two kind of strategic elements, which I think are going to form quite a significant basis of our focus over the coming year. Other aspects that we need to pay attention to as well, collaboration. So what opportunities are there to work with other councils? Good example of that recently is the Building Control Partnership, which council approved just before Christmas. So opportunities where we can save money, but also look to solve resilience issues or capacity problems that sometimes may exist for councils like ourselves. And then also using procurement. We've got an excellent procurement unit, does some great work on our behalf and also other councils as part of a wider partnership, and looking for opportunities to protect services, but also take cost out of them. And we're working through a process at the moment for the Country Park Cafe, where we are hopeful that we will be able to take some costs out of that we currently incur, but also protect what's a very important community asset. And then finally, and I know we'll talk about this later as part of the budget development process, obviously a key part of our financial sustainability is getting our HRA business plan in place for 30 years so that we can have real clarity on what the need is for our stock, what our tenants need from us, and make sure that we are absolutely clear on how we're going to finance and resource that. So that's a really important piece of work, which is live at the minute. And if you can move on to the next slide, please. And just finally for me, before I hand over to Dawn, I think it would be useful just to kind of share some headline messages in relation to the budget development. And these things evolve because there's lots of assumptions when we start back in September about what our cost base is going to be, what the financial settlement is going to be, which are very open-ended at that stage. And so we have to go through a process of refining those assumptions. And now we're at the stage where we've got much greater clarity. And so sometimes, you know, we aren't clear how easy it's going to be to protect our existing commitments. We aren't clear how far we're going to have to bring forward some difficult options for members to consider. Thankfully, this budget, I think, is relatively positive in the context of ones we perhaps brought forward previously and in the context of austerity, because it is able to protect the existing commitments and services that we have, and that we are still able to resource those important aspirations we have in our corporate strategy. Really helpfully as well, through the work of Pranali and her team and the investment the council put in about 18 months ago into corporate assets and the corporate asset team that was established, we now have much better grip and clarity on the needs of our assets, on the stock condition of our assets. And those resources are built into the essential maintenance program within our capital program, which again is before you to consider tonight. As I touched on earlier, the favourable finance settlement has reduced the need for us to consider immediate difficult savings, which is really helpful. And we are in a position where through this budget, we can and are in a position to contribute to our reserves. And so that helps our financial resilience. And it also gives us the opportunity to look at how we might resource some of those key strategic aims, like asset development, like service transformation, so that we can deliver at the pace we want to. So that's something that we'll be keen to talk to you about and look forward to bringing forward some further discussions and options and recommendations on that in due course. I think a final, I guess, word of caution, though, is whilst the financial settlement was relatively positive and the budget is helpful in protecting those things that really matter to us. It is only a one-year settlement. There is still a fair amount of uncertainty around local government finance. The fair funding review still needs to play out, and certainly the messaging from government at the moment is that that's going to happen over the next 12 months. So something we need to pay attention to clearly over the next 12 months is what that's going to mean for us, and therefore it is prudent and appropriate that we continue to look at our resources and how we get the best out of them, which is what I can assure you we'll continue to do. And on that note, I'll hand over to Dawn to continue the presentation, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. So I thought I'd start off with just feeding back some of the key messages that came out of that budget scrutiny workshop that was held in December, where a number of members from this committee had a presentation and were able to have an early discussion and questions around the draft budget proposals. I think the main thing to bear in mind is that that meeting was held before we got the finance settlement. So there was possibly some things discussed there that later were able to be changed because of that favourable settlement position. So members of that scrutiny workshop looked at all of the growth bids and they were happy to support those, and all of them do remain therefore in the draft proposals in the papers in front of you this evening. There was some concern expressed around cemetery space and the need to think about that in terms of future development. And as a result of that, in the papers in front of you, there is a growth bid that's been developed for consultancy to support, to look at what the options are and to do an appraisal around cemetery development. So that's one of the changes that came about as a result of that workshop. There was also obviously the importance of maximising assets was discussed, and Ed's referred to that, and our programme around the asset development initiatives. There was some savings and efficiencies discussed, some of those longer term where scrutiny were interested in keeping an eye on those, and we're assured that there's going to be a development of a people services offer, and that's been added to the financial sustainability programme. Members of that workshop supported the proactive approach to vacancy management, and there was a longer list put in front of that workshop, which has been scaled back a little bit in light of that favourable finance settlement. So for a couple of high priority areas, we were able to pull some of those vacancies back and just reduce that amount a little bit, notably being economic development, which is obviously a key priority as we recover from COVID. And members on that scrutiny workshop were supportive of the capital programme that was being proposed, with some comments about the need to ensure robust procurement to maximise value, particularly in the context of drainage at the at Lake Terrace, I think it was, or was it the MV site actually? Sorry, MV. If we could move on. So moving on to the provisional finance settlement. So all members, I think just before Christmas, I sent a briefing note out on that. So just to recap, as Ed said, that's 1 year only. So that's against a backdrop of a 3-year spending review. So that is disappointing because that does mean we've still got that great uncertainty. So a fantastic settlement for Melton. I don't think all councils saw that. But as I say, that certainty just isn't there. And I don't want to keep peddling the doom and gloom, but I think it's very frustrating and difficult to be able to make those kind of long-term commitments and financial projections without that with that uncertainty. And you'll see later on as we look at some of the numbers that there's a massive swing that could happen that we just don't know where we might end up on in terms of that. There are starting to filter out, I say, uncertainty around timing for that funding review. We are starting to see a little bit trickle out about maybe some examination of some of that from the government, etc., over the spring and summer. As expected, the referendum limit was set at £5 overall, and that's what you see in the papers in front of you. So the proposed budget is based on a £5 overall council tax increase across all funds. Business rates as expected, and we got the princely sum of £211 for the revenue support grant, which we've had nothing from that grant for a number of years. So that was quite an interesting turn of events. Rural Service Delivery Grant was as expected, but the big bonus that Melton gained on, and the reason we seem to gain so much more than other districts, particularly even across Leicestershire, was this new homes bonus. So all the messages were that we would have just 1 year of legacy payment and then it would completely disappear for future years. But they've extended that for 1 year. And because Melton's has such positive housing growth, we gained significantly from that. So that was a £493,000 gain, which is absolutely fantastic. And I think it shows really what some of those other councils have been achieving over the years from new homes bonus that us with our more modest growth have just not been benefiting from. So for those councils where new homes bonus has started to decline, they didn't see such a favourable position to us. So that was a real boost. And then there was these other 2 grants, one of which lower tier services grant we received this year, and that was pitched as a one-off. So we weren't expecting it again, but that's been given for another year. And this new services grant, which was completely new and not expected again, we benefited from that. And what the government said is that the lower tier services grant amount, that amount will roll into future funding settlements, but the distribution might be different. But the services grant is very clearly a one-off. When I presented to that workshop in December, I think we were hoping, we knew there would be more money distributed through the settlement. And I think we were hoping to get around about 150k from that. So actually, I think that's probably comparable with those latter 2 grants that we did get. But as I say, the real bonus was that new homes bonus. We could move on. Okay, so what does that mean for the budget then? So just starting off with the general expenses general fund as opposed to special expenses. So the updated base budget, so keeping all services as is just over 7.7 million. There's growth proposed of 20,000 in the proposals, and that would be a 32,000 on an ongoing basis after next financial year. We've got proposed vacancy savings of 65,000 in there, so they're one-off. So unless you keep those vacancies into the future, when we fill those posts, that amount will then drop out, which results in a proposed net cost of services of still just over 7.7 million. When you take into account all of the accounting entries that we have to do, what we call below the line, so those 9 kind of non-service related ones, that brings that budget down to a net expenditure of 4.7 million. You'll see in there what we're assuming is a contribution from one of our reserves, the business rates equalisation reserves of 262,000, and that follows a similar position to what we've done in this year's budget. And the reason for that is that we have a collection fund, a business rates collection fund deficit. All sorts of reasons as to why that is. That's not dissimilar to a lot of councils, and that's really reflective of some of the impact of COVID on business rates collection and business rates growth, or the lack thereof. I'm quite hopeful that when we sit down this time next year, that that collection fund deficit will have disappeared, and we will either be in a stable position or potentially even maybe in a surplus position, because our collection rates are quite healthy and we're doing very well. So I think that's just a one-off, and that's why I'm comfortable that we use that equalisation reserve to boost that on a one-off basis. It does mean that that reserve, based on current estimates, will be quite low, which you'll see later on in the presentation, but I still feel comfortable doing that. It just does mean that if we're in that position again, you would be having to draw on your core budget and potentially make savings to meet any future loss, but I'm hopeful that won't be the case. And then you'll see there the other areas that we're meeting that 4.7 million from, being business rates, council tax, new homes bonus, etc., with one contribution from the reserves of 25,000 to meet non-recurring costs of the transfer of the building control service. What that then results in is a surplus on the revenue budget of 384,000, and the proposal is that that's transferred to the Regeneration and Innovation Reserve so that we can take time to think about how best to utilise that benefit that we've gained from that new homes bonus, and think about where we can perhaps boost some of our programmes and invest on a one-off basis. And I think, as Ed has already said as well, that boost from the new homes bonus, we have to take that as one-off monies that we potentially don't know will be repeated. And I think if you look at that budget, if we took that new homes bonus out in its entirety and nothing else changed, that that surplus of 384k would be entirely wiped out and would actually be in a deficit position. And that just highlights that precarious nature that we have once that money's dried up, and why we're treating it as that kind of one-off windfall, but still giving you that ability to invest in services and some non-recurring expenditure. So I mentioned about those growth bids. So you can see how that's made up there. More details in the pack. So there's some investment proposed to health and safety, climate change, and maintaining the commitment to the enhanced Christmas lights budget, £20,000 with an ongoing impact of 32. On special expenses, moving on to special expenses Melton Mowbray. So there you can see there that the updated base budget is just under 600,000, and you've got that one-off, just only one proposed growth, which is the 20,000 consultancy for the cemetery provision, which I mentioned earlier, which came from that scrutiny workshop. And then when you take into account other accounting adjustments, etc., a net expenditure of just over 500,000 met from council tax and the special expenses reserve. So the reason that we're using a contribution for core spending from special expenses is, members may recall in the past, special expenses Melton Mowbray's got quite healthy reserves, and because of the pressure that we'd had in the past on general expenses and the pressure we expect to have in the future, members took that decision on some occasions in the past to either not increase council tax on special expenses, and I think it was in 1 year to certainly have a reduction so that we could maximise council tax increase on the general fund. And you'll see when we look at forward projections, as we start to increase the number of properties within the town area, which is where the majority of the growth is, that starts to be reversed and you get into a balanced position. So it's just a way of using those reserves and enabling less pressure to be put on general expenses. So I think just a bit of focus really on savings proposals that are being progressed. So obviously when we met with Scrutiny workshop before Christmas, we didn't know about the favourable finance settlements, and there was a number of savings proposals on the table. Obviously, we've not had to bring forward those difficult decisions because we're more healthy for next financial year. But as Ed said, there's no certainty, and we need to maintain that momentum on looking for areas that, should the worst come to the worst, we could make those savings. And it might be any way that we want to take some of those efficiencies and you want to redistribute resources to areas of greater priority. So there's just some areas there that we'll continue to work on and will feed into that financial sustainability programme. So there's a list on there. I won't go through them in detail, but we're just taking that time to progress those and build those up. So what does all that mean for council tax levels? So you can see there at the bottom, as I said, we're moving from £212 to £217. So that's your £5 overall increase in line with the referendum limit. On the special expenses parish areas, Sproston, Frisbee and Gadsby, where reserves are not held, the council tax has been set at a level that results in a balanced budget. And you do get wide swings there because they're really small budgets with really small tax bases. Just a very small change in the budget or an underspend in any one particular year does have a large impact on council tax levels. But we will look to try and stabilise that and try and minimise that as much as we can moving forward. So they're set at a level to balance the budget. A zero increase following the pattern in previous years of special expenses Melton Mowbray, and then the bulk of that increase is where the pressure is on general expenses, which results in a 2.85% increase on general expenses. So I mentioned about future years projections, and obviously all that great uncertainty. So we've had to try something to try and at least come up with some kind of forward projection. So what we do is we factor in things like where we think inflation might be. We also take account of where demand might change, particularly on income, etc. But we don't factor anything in there for what we call management intervention or policy change. So you can see what those projections might be with all things remaining equal. I think two of the big changes that we have factored in there as best we can are around the changes to the waste legislation. So introduction of food waste that is proposed. We've tried to make some projections about what new burdens funding we might get for that. And I think the other change we've factored in is around the land charges and move to the land registry for the provision of that service. So broadly, a lot of those inflationary increases and those changes are covered by the increase in council tax, assuming an ongoing increase at a flat rate of £5 in line with current referendum limits. But what we have done in there from 23-24 onwards is we've started to assume what happens when that new homes bonus goes, and what happens if we would have something like a business rates reset, which has been on the cards for a number of years and the government continually puts off, giving us that huge uncertainty. And when we come on to a later slide, you'll see where I've done some sensitivity analysis, and that might put it into a bit more of a perspective. But in terms of these, what I would call expected position, I've just gone straight down the middle in terms of what would happen if we kept all of the current monies that we're getting now, which we know the government has said will not be the case, and what would happen if we had a full business rates reset, new homes bonus goes, and nothing else replaces that, and there's no transitional relief. So you've got those two extremes, and what I've done with on this slide is I've predicted, let's just go down the middle for the want of anything else, just to give some indication of what the likely gap might be. So, you know, you can see there that should that happen, there's going to be considerable pressure on the council. That's a situation that's reflected across the country with any council that's had business rates growth and has been benefiting from new homes bonus. We'll just move on. And then on special expenses, you can see there's not that same pressure because they do not receive business rates as part of that budget, and nor do they get a portion of new homes bonus. So that's where you can see that fairly stabilized position around the net costs of services. And you can see in there that as we increase the housing numbers and that brings in more council tax, it reverses that need to draw on the reserve, and we move into a balanced position without using reserves. Just a bit of a focus on some of the assumptions and risks in there. So you'll notice in your papers that the finance settlement is still provisional. So I'm waiting for the finance settlement, and that's why that wording in your papers is still in a shaded position, because I'm waiting for that to be finalised. Hopefully that will be done before Cabinet. If not, it'll have to be done before Council, otherwise we'll have an issue with the council tax calculations. It's the consultation has closed, so I'm hoping that will come through soon, and the last few years it's been fairly stable, so I'm not expecting any particular changes around that. I've mentioned the council tax increase. We've not made any real provision for COVID costs, but what we have done is been realistic about some of our income streams, particularly car parking and leisure. And that does carry a risk with that we might get that wrong. We might have, you know, we could recover really quickly and find that we've been too prudent, or it could carry on and that could have an impact on our budget. Assumption there around the pay award. Housing growth obviously is always a risk, and I've already mentioned the next couple of points, so we can move on. So I did mention, as I said, around some of that scenario planning and sensitivity analysis, and you can see exactly what I've said there. So in a best case scenario, if we've carried on exactly as we are now, and those kind of levels of new homes bonus were to continue, the scheme was to continue in its current form, business rates retention was to continue in its current form, you know, we'd be looking okay. We'll be okay at those kind of levels, subject to services remaining as is. However, if we were to have a full business rates reset, new homes bonus was to disappear in its entirety, and the government did not replace anything and provided no transitional relief, then you're looking at really large losses there. So that just kind of gives you some perspective of the range and why it's such a big deal to council. So, you know, you could spend a lot of time tweaking and scenario planning around cost of services, but ultimately that's what we need. We need that certainty over funding from the government and where that's going to go. Sorry, I need to pause on the previous one. Okay. So I think the chair, I have got a slide later on which I'll pick up potentially under capital around what some of the impact of all the proposals are on the council's reserves and balances. But I'm going to pause here because I think the chair wants to take questions and debate on the revenue budget at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed and Dawn. It was a very comprehensive presentation there. You notice how Dawn starts off on an optimistic note, and then, being a finance man myself, always come down to the, well, we've got to be careful over the next few years. So if we finish off with doom and gloom, as members will say, could I just pick up on a couple of those slides? If we go to members to page 17, I think it is. Is it 17 or 16? Yep, yeah. I'm pleased to see that we're appointed a consultant for the work on the cemetery. I think with that, we've got to be careful because there's not a lot of a balance in the special expenses reserve. We've only got £284,000, as you saw on the slide. So I just wondered, can anybody tell me what a new cemetery would cost? Or is it too premature to get a figure out? And depending what figure is offered, how would you fund it? Because you've really got two choices, and one is borrowing. Borrowing is 50 years, 2% at the moment, but on top of that you've got the interest, which would be, but if it was £1 million, for instance, it'd be 20,000 a year, and you'd have an additional 20,000 for a minimum revenue provision, minimum revenue provision. So that'd be one alternative, which would be costing us £40,000 a year. And we've got to raise income from the cemetery to fund that. Or unless, Pranali, is it in the local plan? Are the section 106 monies? It's not.
It's not in the current local plan. Having said that, we are at the time to commence the review of the local plan because we are approaching that end period for review. So there is possibility that we can add it to the local plan, which could help with section 106 money, but it's not in the current local plan.
Useful if it was, because I think borrowing, do we know what the cost of a cemetery would be?
So where we're at the moment is we've been speaking to sort of national organisations to make sure we can take the right advice regarding cemetery developments. I think the first thing I would like to say is sort of a thank you to members for really raising this as an area of high importance, and you know the time that it will take to develop the proposals in our sort of 2 to 3 years. So really important that we start that work now. So what we've got is we've not procured a specialist to do that work. We've got the understanding of who can do that work and the feasibility and development work for us and what the cost of that would be, and that would help us to then understand those costings of a long term over a number of different phases for a new cemetery, and there'll be lots of variables for that. So yes, it's too premature to know the fine details, but our officers have said really in excess of £1 million we'll be looking at for a decent sized cemetery. So we do need to have those considerations and those discussions really about how do we resource that, what what appetite is there to have that continued provision in the future, and how do we make that happen. So an awful lot of work that needs to go into this. excuse me, and we will need some real specialist resource and capacity to make sure that we can do a really good job on that and make sure that we do have that continuity of provision. What we are hoping to do is to bring some initial proposals to Cabinet in the next few weeks for that initial discussion in steer, once we've got the further details that come from the business case that we'll then develop.
I think raising the council tax is going to be difficult to fund, go towards the funding. So we'll leave that with you, Michelle, and look forward to hearing something in the future. And the other slide was the 384,000, which is being transferred to the regeneration and innovation as the surplus. Now, if you turn to page 18, members, item J, it said the budgeted surplus is transferred to Regen and Innovation Reserve for key activities to support projects that will result in growth in commercial return, etc. What key projects are we thinking about there? Who's the best person to? Ed? Yep.
Briefly respond to that. I mean, it's a ring-fenced or earmarked reserve to support innovation, change, some of the transformational stuff we referred to, and it's there to be drawn down to support those kind of one-off projects. So I think asset development would be one where, if the council was minded to want to accelerate that or invest additional resources in that program, that might be a mechanism through which you would use that reserve to support it. But it is about spend to save or invest to save opportunities or transformational opportunities, so that through that investment, we right-size the organisation, we make the council more efficient, or we answer some of the questions we've got about how to use our assets more effectively. So that's just an example, but ultimately these things would have to meet the test of a business case, and they need obviously relevant approvals as well, of course.
Would you be looking at to appoint extra members of staff in that section? I think
it's certainly something we're looking at. I mean, we had a really good conversation, didn't we, at the informal group about the progress that's been made in asset development over the last year since the formation of the corporate assets team. But that team is doing a lot of work at the moment on legacy issues, I suppose, in terms of just getting us back up to where we want to be. It's also got a day job, so it's managing leases and tenancies now. It's got a corporate asset register in place, so it's a whole range of things it's putting in place, as well as then we wanted to think strategically about the future. So it's a big ask on that team. So one of the questions we're posing ourselves is, how do we make sure the things we want to get done around asset development happen at the pace we need them to, so that we maintain financial sustainability? Because we talk about asset development, we want to see delivery, all of us do, but these things take time. So we aren't yet in a position to answer that question, but we are intending to bring some further thoughts and potential proposals through to relevant committees and council in due course, and in the next couple of months, I would suggest.
Would you keep Scrutiny involved?
Of course, yeah. I think we've got a long-standing commitment to keep Scrutiny involved, and we certainly found the process that the working group discussion we had recently around the budget was very helpful. And I think we want to put these things on the table and talk about them, because our assets are very important. They've got community value, community use, and we need to make sure we get the best out of them. So I think the wider buy-in and discussion and ownership of that from across the council, the better.
We'll open it for debate. Have you anything to say, Elaine, on the two topics I raised?
Well, I'd like to have gone back to what you said about the cemetery. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did actually mention it to Michelle, didn't I? I don't know whether you've managed to get anywhere with that, but I know it's not a very nice subject, but we haven't got a crematorium. Now, that Grantham and Nottingham and Loughborough, it is very, very difficult, apparently, to be able to access those quickly, because there's always a backlog. To actually have our own crematorium is something of which you would actually it sounds awful, people dying and you're making money from it, but that is what happens.
And quite honestly, we've been mentioning this for ages, and it's not gone anywhere, and it should have gone somewhere. And I just feel that I have had an insight into somebody who talked to me about it, who has money to put into these, but nobody's ever seemed to want to do any more about it. And I do think that it is time we looked at something like this, because it is vitally important. I don't know what other members think, but I just think we've got to look at everything and every angle. Thank you.
Yeah, on the cemetery, I would agree with Elaine that we do need to have that sort of provision in town. You can't have people going all the way to Loughborough, Nottingham and Grantham. You know, you say it's a difficult subject, but, you know, you have to have these conversations in life, don't you? You know, we need to make sure that we've got the provision in town, either in terms of cemetery space or, well, both really, a crematorium space as well, and plots for people who want to have ashes interned as well as to be buried. You know, we need to think about these things long term, particularly with the aging population that Melton's going to have and the country's going to have, you know. So I'd agree with Elaine. We do need to explore it properly. Yeah. And I know that officers are.
Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm coming back to the same subject, I'm afraid. Most of the villages have still got churchyards which the parish precepts are financing. So we've got to be very careful about this, that we're not going to charge the villages for a new cemetery in Melton, because we can't be asking the rural people to be paying twice. I mean, ours is quite, we have to support 2 churchyards, Bottisford Parish Council do, and it's quite a hefty chunk on the precepts.
This would be a charge on the Melton residents.
Yes, but that wasn't made clear in the report, I don't think,
okay, yeah, I'm right there, Dawn. Yeah, thank you. Ed.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, just to pick up the point again about the CREM. I know we did touch on this, didn't we, at the task and finish group, and I know Dawn mentioned at the time that I think this was something the council did look at possibly 10 years ago, maybe, Dawn, something to that effect. And I know at the time there wasn't a business case, or the finances didn't stack up in terms of the investment and outturn, because, you know, as you can imagine, you need a certain population and catchment to make it commercially viable. However, clearly times moved on since then. We've already touched on the number of houses that have been built. I know obviously Michelle's talked about commissioning specialists to look at the cemetery provision. I wonder if there's an opportunity through that commission to ask them to review the work we've done before and check. You know, I think it's important we do check, because certainly in places where there is sufficient population, crematorium can be income generators. Cemeteries will always cost money. Crematorium can bring in revenue. So I think it's certainly incumbent and helpful for us to review that and check that our assumptions are still up to date, or whether the position's changed. And I think that'll be a useful thing to learn from the specialists we commission.
Mr. Clancy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I totally agree with Elaine and other members this evening. I think we have to look at this and take the blinkers off and just see what the whole picture, not just think, oh, a cemetery. I think we do need to look at the whole. And we have a huge growth going on, as we've had the fantastic new homes bonus, which is absolutely brilliant. But hopefully the growth will continue. We've got a commitment to build 6,000 homes, if not more. So the time has come where we do need to look beyond that and beyond what it was 10 years ago. So yes, fully support that. On page 17, I know I've already had a little conversation with Ronnie about this one. When you look at the undertaking and procurement to identify a new provider to run the country park, should that not be Country Park Cafe? Because if this goes out to the public, they're going to go, wow, what's happening here? So can that be corrected, please, if you don't mind?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, for your chair. I'd already picked that up and corrected it in the papers that go to Cabinet.
Brilliant, Illingworth. And you, Jacob.
Yes, just to add to the comment about sort of crematorium thing, I was Chief Exec suggested it. I'm sure we could incorporate a fairly broad brush estimate of, you know, some sort of very preliminary feasibility study for that. But just picking up on Councillor Chandler's comment, my first reaction was, surely we couldn't advocate a situation where it was, as Melton Borough, you would have, because we can't ask the villagers to contribute to something that's in the town.
No, John,
The flip side.
no, it's a charge on Melton council taxpayers purely. It is not for the wider borough.
So would it be the case then that if somebody from, say, Thorpe Arnold, Waltham, Scorford, whatever, who lived most of their life in Melton and just happened to die when they were living somewhere else or whatever, we're actually going to turn around, we would potentially turn around and say, no, sorry, you can't be buried in Melton. You're from the villages. What, how divisive would that be? This constant town versus borough thing riles me no end. And that just strikes me as a really negative scenario. Correct me if I've misunderstood it.
Yeah, the council has special expenses and they are determined by council under various legislation, and council decides what constitutes a special expense. And that the criteria for special expenses, if it is provided and paid for in a parish area, then it is a town special expense. And the cemetery is one of those that is defined as a special expense. And that's why in the papers, the growth bid for the consultancy is being met from the special expenses reserve, and why the chair talked about the pressure on special expenses if we have to buy land and develop a cemetery, and where that was going to be met from, because obviously that would be a charge to special expenses. So you would have to, if you wanted to change that definition, that would have to go back to full council, and I would suggest it would be a review of all of your special expenses. In terms of the criteria, I don't believe, but we could check, that I'm sure that if somebody from Asfordby or Stathern or anywhere wished to be buried in Melton Cemetery, I don't recall that we actually preclude that. It's just that the cost of that service provision is met from the town taxpayers only.
Douglas.
Chair. Yes, page 10, building on from the cemetery issue, 4.1.2, you're talking about the cemetery lodge and the loss of income there, about 9 grand. I seem to remember a few years ago, it could have been at the governance committee, I'm sure we agreed that it was a good idea to refurbish the lodge and to either rent it out or sell it, and we voted on it. It's quite a traumatic decision at the time. So I'm surprised that we've got a loss there. I thought it would be just a refurbishment and a put up for rental situation.
One assumes it's been we're paying empty rate on the if there's nobody living there, so that not only the loss of income purely from fees, but the a payment to ourselves for the empty rates. Is that right, Dawn?
Yeah, through you, Chair. We did spend a lot of money on that building. It was quite a few years ago now, I think, and we let it. And we did get that rental income. My understanding is that tenant has left. It's an old building. I'm not sure why we've got the long-term empty, but it might be because there's more work that we need to do. But it is an old building, and obviously I believe it's listed as well.
So it's not a case of just knocking it down then. It's not as simple as that. Yeah, Jacob.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to come back to John's point as somebody who represents a town ward. You know, I'm not comfortable with only town residents being charged for a cemetery that could be used by somebody who lives in Asfordby, dies in Asfordby, and then is buried in Melton or wherever else. Why is it just that town residents should have to foot the bill for something which has the potential of being a borough-wide thing? And how do we look at removing that from the special expenses? Because as a councillor who represents a town and lives in Asfordby, you know, the likelihood is if I was to drop dead tomorrow, I'd be buried in town, but I'm not paying for that as a resident in Asfordby, but my residents in Sizenby are. I just don't think it's very fair, particularly when we're talking about £1 million project as well.
I think what we're talking about here is the budget. I think in terms of that would be policy, but you do pay to be, you do have to pay to be buried in the cemetery. Again, I don't believe there's differential charges between whether you're a town. Oh, you believe there are, councillor? So I mean, it's around your charging policy and your policy for accessing that service, which is different to the budget proposals on the table. But I think there's something there around the policy that we could look at. But I think the portfolio holder, do you want to come in?
Final
Yes,
question on
thank you,
this
Dawn.
then from Councillor Holmes, and then we'll move on to the next
Chairman,
point.
Chairman, if I can just,
Yeah.
Chairman, if we may just finish on that one, there is usually a differential in the actual charges for the burial for people who live outside the area. For example, in Ashford, if it's an Ashford resident, there is one price, and if it's a resident from externally, it's a different price. And I think that applies to many of the cemeteries around. So that may answer Jacob's question.
Councillor Holmes, did you want to?
Yeah, just wanted to, I can totally understand where people are coming from, actually. But the village precept has to take into consideration that unfortunately, all parishes have to look after their churches, regardless of whether they are not being used anymore. The church grounds, this is, for instance. Waltham has a big area of stone around the churchyard. That has to be paid for through the parish council and their precept. Exactly the same problem we have at Scorford. I was at a meeting last night at Scorford. Then also in that parish we have Chadwell. And we have to look after, the parish councils and the villages have to look after the church areas. So that is part of our precepts. So we actually are paying for that. And it can be quite draining. It is very draining. Just one little thing, at Scorford, unless you live in Scorford, you cannot be buried in the churchyard because they won't have you. Well, not the churchyard, but the new churchyard up the road. So that's just one thing.
Sorry, I didn't see your hand, Prue.
Thank you. Just come in with a quickie here. The parish has to pay for new ground for if you have to. Currently, the situation at Bottisford is that the churchyard is nearly full. I think that's an awful description, but that is the top and bottom of it. And we're looking for new ground to put a cemetery, which will, if it's not in the churchyard, it's then classified as a cemetery. But you have to meet such a high criteria these days. I mean, both the churchyards in the parish at Musson and Bottisford, they've got the river running through them. But you've got to be so far away now from a watercourse before you can get any ground even sanctioned by the Environment Agency. So it is quite a high cost on a parish to actually purchase land that will be passed by the Environment Agency as a safe ground. So I think, there's a lot more to this than one or two councillors are aware
Final
of.
word then from Dawn.
Yeah, I've just looked at the fees and charges, and we charge almost double for non-parishioners to be buried in Melton Cemetery. So if you live outside the town area, you will pay almost twice to be buried and for other services.
We'll move on to consider other questions from item 4.
Thank you. Whilst I appreciate the financial situation that the council finds itself moving forward, and given the cost of living crisis that the country is going to go through over the next 12 months, inflation at 7%, national insurance contributions are going to be increased. Given that there's going to be a surplus in this budget, there's a £250,000, nearly £250,000 underspend. How are officers and indeed the cabinet lead justifying a council tax increase at this time? Given the amounts that, including the capital, I know we're not going on to capital, but there's a sizable underspend there as well. How are you justifying this council tax increase?
From a financial perspective, I think that without that certainty going forward, if you do not maximise your council tax, you will lose that income forever. You can't get that back. It's not like you can set a £10 next year because of the referendum limits. So you will lose that income year on year. And you could find yourself in the situation where in 1 or 2 years' time where you're having to make cuts. And if you had maximised council tax when you had the opportunity to do so, that you wouldn't have had to make those cuts. So that's firstly one thing. And I think probably what I omitted to say in the presentation as well was that we did have a local government association review of our finances, and one of the key things that they picked up was around our level of reserves and the low level that they were at. So what you will see in that budget, and there will be a slide later after capital around reserves, is that we're attempting through the underspending this year, proposing that we start to increase the working balance to the level that was recommended by that LGA review. So I think that, you know, is a particular key factor, and we were picked up on that by SIPFA and the financial resilience and by the LGA review. So that's from a pure financial perspective.
Thank you for that, Dawn. Anyone else? Chris, Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Dawn knows where I'm coming from again, so I'll ask the same question I asked last year, I believe. The special expenses, they seem to go up and down at random. Gadsby seems to have been cut in half. I wish I was living in Gadsby, I don't. And Melton, once again, Mowbray, seems to have no increase at all. Obviously, my concern, and I know there are Melton Borough councillors here, but I still have to say it, is there seems to be a slow shift between the amount of burden on Melton residents against the general. And why is that? Because I assume with inflation and all the rest of it, the Melton costs are going up as much as the whole borough is, and I don't understand quite why that is.
So that, Dawn?
Yep.
Yeah, so again, from I suppose a technical finance perspective, the council its referendum limit is on the whole of the council tax. So that includes all of your funds. In terms of the Gadsby, Frisbee and Sproson, the only thing they're paying for is the closed churchyard. So that's what they're paying for in those areas. And I think it is frustrating that because there's a very low tax base, if we just underspend in any one year because some planned maintenance on those churchyards don't happen, and the budgets are really modest on that. So I think we've got something like 500 to £1,000 on one of them. And if we just underspend by a few hundred on that, that has a huge impact in terms of the level of council tax. And I think we need to work to do that, to be more accurate in terms of how we budget for that, or do the work that we set out to do. So I think that it probably explains those. I think they're just they're exposed to huge fluctuations because of that. In terms of special expenses, Melton Mowbray, there's not been the same pressure on that, because you can see that general fund is under considerable pressure because they have all of the business rates retention and they have all of the new homes bonus. So you take that away or that's reduced, then there's considerable pressure on the general fund. And members have taken that decision that because of that referendum limit and because of that pressure on the general fund, instead of cutting services in order to balance that budget and raising council tax on town taxpayers that is only going to go into reserve, that they've taken the bulk of that increase on the general fund, because that's where the pressure is, and the pressure is on that because of that declining income in terms of government support.
Another question, which is on page 37. This is the one area I do have concerns over, because this is the one about freezing officer posts, and in particular the one on project planning. I read through this, and whoever wrote this has made it quite clear there are risks involved in us doing this. And this is to actually have someone who looks after and helps the officers do their project management. It's a corporate improvement. That's 38k. To me, cutting out, I know we need to be prudent and all the rest of it, but to me, as a member, I can only say and speak on behalf of myself, I think that is a bad decision. We need to recover from COVID. We need to have officers making the right decision with the right support. And this will be a key stage for us to move forward and not possibly, I'm not saying I'm sure that Ed won't, but possibly make mistakes in not having the staff ready to do it. And we have got big projects coming up, as we've seen on sports, and other things. There are big projects that we want to get a grip of, and we need our staff, not consultants, but our staff to support our officers. And I think personally, I'm not happy with the other ones, even though they say no impact on service on the other ones. Doesn't make me feel good, but I feel, given what Dawn said, and I know she's cautious as ever, I think that 38k would be well invested to make certain that our officers are doing with the right background support to actually do the job. And I can't tell you how I feel as strong about that, because I've seen officers make mistakes because they are stretched. And we're all stretched, and I'm sure at the moment because of COVID, but officers in particular. And I would love to see them, being we have got that flexibility, in my opinion, get that support now and put that 40k investment in this year, not out. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I'm going to answer now as a service manager, because this post actually falls within my service area, which was previously the corporate improvement team. So I accept what you're saying, and I agree with that kind of ethos around that. What I want to do is reassure members that in terms of project support and some of those big projects, you mentioned leisure and the asset development programme, we have been funding additional project support through those projects. And we've also been building in additional capacity from some of the COVID new burdens monies for those areas. I think had we filled this post, I'm not sure that they, at that kind of level, because this includes salary on costs, etc., that it would have provided the necessary specialist support that somebody like Pranali's team would need for those kind of large construction and property related projects. So I'm not sure that it would have fulfilled what you were aiming for. We've got a retirement coming up in that area, and I want to do a review of the whole resources in that area. So I think I don't think filling that post at this time would be a good thing. I think we've got the resources in those areas that we need. Ed's already mentioned about the asset development programme and looking again at what more resources we need to further those projects. And I think we need to review that team and make sure we've got the right balanced resources based on the priorities that we've got, and that retirement offers that opportunity. So I would still say at this time, I wouldn't rush to fill that post.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure who to address this question to, but it's a similar one along the lines of Chris, with around the elections post. You know, the impact will manifest if and when we have an unexpected event such as by-elections, which isn't out the realms of possibility within the next 6 months, and particularly given that the next civic year is the run-up to borough-wide elections. What impact is the reduction in that post going to have? Perhaps Ed, you could answer that.
Yeah, I'm happy to give assurance on that. So this is so there's no loss of any capacity. We simply have a full-time post on the establishment, but in terms of the work being done by the post holder, it's simply at a reduced level. And actually the reduced level is sufficient for what we have in terms of need now and need in the future. So all we've done is simply say we don't need the money. We want to keep the establishment at one. So if we have any turnover, we can recruit to a full-time post, but we don't need the money. So we're offering the money back for this year. Obviously, we need to keep it in the budget for future years, but at this point, we don't need it. So there will be no impact on service at this point, or our ability to service a by-election or any other needs the election team have.
Councillor Douglas.
Yes, linking with those concerns everyone's been, the members have been voicing. I'm also concerned about the natural wastage of staff when people just leave and move away. For example, I know Albert Wilson's leaving at the end of this month, I think he is, and I'm just wondering, is he being replaced? And also, you know, that kind of hidden issue of staff going that's not brought to our attention as members. Are they being replaced? Will they be replaced, or will they be, as Dawn Garton's explained, in with the wider review? But I'm just bringing that to everybody's attention, because I think that's something that could kind of like be missed by in our awareness. Thank you. Thank you.
I think you'll find that the SLT review the vacancy in line with present work that's got to be done in that section, and that if if the salary needs to be increased to take on somebody more experienced, then so be it. But that's how do you want
Yeah,
to?
I mean, we manage and monitor every vacancy that comes up. We'll take stock at that point and consider whether we need to do a straight recruitment, whether we need to relook at the salary, whether we need to restructure it, because obviously a vacancy creates an opportunity to relook afresh at the resource and question ourselves, is it in the right place? So that's the approach that all our managers will take before they gain approval to proceed. And I know that Michelle, obviously, as a relatively new director to us, will be taking stock of any opportunities that create. So I know that's very much on her radar. Like with any relatively senior post and other senior posts, we may not jump straight into recruitment. We might want to bring someone in on an interim basis just to give us a bit of breathing space, because these are expensive and important resources and we have to get them right. And so rather than knee-jerking straight to recruitment, we will take stock. And I know, Michelle quite rightly is taking time. I don't know if you have anything further to add on that, Michelle.
Yeah, I mean, just as an example, the post that you've mentioned. So yeah, that officer leaves the authority at the end of this week. Really sad to see him go, but we have worked really closely with him to ensure that we understand, where are the risks, where are the opportunities, and what could we do differently in the future. And really a review of actually what's that work plan and that workload likely to look like for that post over the coming months, because there's an awful lot happening. So that as an example, we will put in place an interim arrangement. We've looked at the functions individually, because some of our managers have a big remit, a lot of functions that they're managing. So we've looked at what we can do through sort of changes to internal reporting arrangements and what we might need to bring some external resource in for, which is what we'll be doing for part of that. And so linked to that, we'll be looking at where the risks might be. So for example, the waste strategy is a really, really key piece of work over the coming months. We need to make sure we've got somebody with the right expertise to support us through that. So that is an example of that. We won't jump straight into recruitment, but we absolutely will see that continuity of leadership and support. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? I'll ask, Councillor Chandler, sorry.
The part-time posts of community safety officer. I'm quite concerned about that, because we had quite a few problems last year and Orf came out and he couldn't give us the help he thought we needed because of lack of manpower. And we have got a lot of vandalism. We've got a lot of antisocial behaviour through the whole borough, not just the town, the villages and all over the place. And I'm wondering if, this is money well saved, quite frankly. I mean, I'm sure it probably is. You've researched it, but there's a problem out there and people are concerned about community safety.
So yeah, good point. So, where we've got a vacancy, we will always review where, what risks have we got. Now, with that particular vacancy, isn't a vacancy we've held for some time. We are reviewing the overall work plans and what are required for that service area over the next few months. We've also had some additional funding specific to domestic abuse that we're looking at how we then support our housing colleagues so that community safety isn't just the responsibility of one team. So we're looking at that. And then we've been having discussions with our colleagues today about how we link with a wider community safety partnership about what's needed, because there have been some challenges in Melton of late. We need to review that, and I know that the Scrutiny Committee will receive a full presentation from the police and crime colleagues in the next few months as well, where that is something that I'm sure will be discussed. So a lot of things with the way that services are delivered and the way that we manage our staffing is really dynamic and it's changing all of the time, and we need to constantly take stock of that. I'm comfortable with that position at the moment, but we are keeping it under review, and we are also looking at how we build that networking and resilience across all of our services so that we don't have that sort of focus on one subject area in one particular place. So I feel it's manageable at the present time. Thank you.
Well, I think members, all the comments will have been noted, and they'll go to the cabinet in the next week, 10 days. So confirm that the recommendation is that Scrutiny Committee notes the report and provides comments to cabinet for them to consider. Thank you. To item 5. The Capital Programme General Fund and Capital Strategy for next year. So if Dawn could do the presentation. And then we'll invite members to comment on it.
Okay, yes, thank you, Chair. So moving on to capital then. So you've got the proposals in front of you along with the capital strategy. So I've split these down just for ease. So we've had a couple of projects that have been moved from 2021-22 into next year. So that's the sustainable warmth and the environmental maintenance vehicle replacement. So you'll see on the right hand side, you can see where the funding is coming from or is proposed to come from. So the sustainable warmth is grant funded, and the environmental maintenance vehicle is covered by our repairs and renewal fund. So what we do with vehicles, just as some background there, because we buy those outright as part of the revenue budget, we set aside a certain amount each year based on estimated useful life and residual values, almost as a proxy for depreciation. And you can see there, though, however, that the proposal is to increase that from the 50k that's currently in the programme to 75. Members will recall there's already the 250k in the programme that was approved for education infrastructure funded from loan. And then we had 3 areas, schemes in the programme that, whilst they were in there, recognising that forward planning over the 5 year of the capital programme, that they haven't actually been previously funded. And we've got disabled facilities grant, which is wholly externally funded. There's a number of IT projects that are due for replacement, again from the IT repair and renewal fund, and a small warm home grant, which is funded externally. And then if we go to the next slide. There's then been an amendment proposed for the Lake Terrace depot. So that's been in your programme for a while. I understand work is starting to commence on that one. There's a request to increase that by another 30,000, and the proposal is to fund that from the Leisure Vision capital receipts. I will come back on to some of the various funding in a minute. And then we've got some new schemes that have been put forward. These are largely around asset improvements, and they've resulted from the stock condition surveys that we've had undertaken on our general fund assets, which we've been waiting to have the information from that for some time. That's come through, and whilst we can only afford essential repairs, so that's the intention, is that each year we will look at what's essential from those condition surveys and bring those forward as capital or revenue proposals. I think it's quite positive that we've at least been able to afford those essential repairs as indicated by the stock condition surveys. So there's some drainage works at Melton Sports Village, a number of works to this building, Cattle Market, and a number of the car parks. And you'll see there the proposals that where we've got sinking funds or repairs and renewals fund, we're proposing that the money comes from that. And again, in other areas, funding from capital receipts. And then the other new scheme is around Lifeline, which is replacing some of the units from analog to digital, at a cost of 15,000. So adding all of those together, you're looking at a general fund capital programme proposals of just over 1.6 million, with nothing on special expenses Melton Mowbray at this time. And I think the next slide talks about the various reserves that we've got. So this is applicable to both revenue and capital. So in terms of capital receipts, we're at a really low level, and this is a point that I've made for the last few years. So the only way we're going to generate a capital receipt is if we sell an asset, and that obviously is why the asset development programme is so important, because it generates that additional monies if you go for a straightforward sale, to either use that money to invest elsewhere or spend on capital or improve your assets. They're at a really low level. So what that means is, in order to do some of the proposals that are on the table, and certainly around some of those asset repairs that are necessary, the only way we could fund that is to use some of the Leisure Vision capital receipts. And for members, just some background there. When we sold the land on Nottingham Road to Sainsbury's, £1 million of that was set aside for leisure vision investment in the future. Some of that has been spent previously on various improvement works, on leisure improvement works. It is a capital receipt, so can only be used for capital or to repay debt. And we're getting to that stage where unless we sell some other assets and generate some capital receipts, if you want to fund the programme in front of you, you need to draw on those for wider purposes. There's the corporate priorities reserve, which, after taking into account the proposals in front of you, is estimated at the end of next financial year to stand at just over 1.1 million. That's quite an improvement over the really low level that we had a couple of years ago. And the general fund working balance, as I mentioned earlier, that was at 640. And if we underspend in line with where we think we will for this year, by keeping in line with the proposals, by using that to boost the working balance, you would have a balance of 870. That's still below what the LGA was recommending, which was around £1 million, but it's a huge step in the right direction. And I think, again, if we underspend again in future, we can look at boosting that further up to that level. The chair spoke about the regeneration and innovation reserve. So with that extra 384,000 going in there, that would stand at just under £500,000. But obviously there's going to be proposals coming forward to utilise that. Special expenses working balance 50,000, and then again, as the chair referred, special expenses general reserve at 284,000, which is fairly generous in the context of that budget, because that's what nearly 50% of the annual revenue budget. But in the context of potentially a new cemetery, probably not a lot, but it is quite healthy. And then I spoke earlier about that draw on that business rates equalisation reserve. And from the kind of fluctuations that you get on business rates, because they almost go in a 3-year cycle, most councils who are prudent have this similar sort of reserve. The aim is to smooth that out with those variations that you get. We would really hope to have something around 250 to 300,000 in that reserve. So based on projections for this year and next, that does bring that below where we would hope that to be. But again, I'm fairly positive that we will start to be able to boost that a little bit as we start to recover on that business rates income, but it is a risk. And I think that's probably it on the reserves. And then I think that's it until we get to HRA. So yeah, so we'll pause there then, and questions on capital. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Just before we start, I just want to point out to members, they may have spotted it, but on page 51, number 5.1, the underspend is 582 as stated. The expected spending is 1991, not 1191. Had you spotted it, Margaret? Yeah, sorry. So yes, I invite members then to comment on the draft capital programme and to ask questions to officers, and which will be fed back to scrutiny. So carry on then, Margaret.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the previous item, when you mentioned about assets and repairs, etc., to them, has the lodge at the cemetery been included in that? Because if it's not being let, what's wrong with it? Has that been included anywhere along the line? Do we know?
Yes, it is part of the whole condition surveys program. I'm not entirely certain if it has already been completed or it's underway, but I can give you those details. But it is part of the general fund condition survey program.
So there's no sort of reason why it hasn't been let, or is there something glaring glaringly wrong with it?
No, we know that there is definitely works required.
Okay.
So before we can let it to the next tenant. So yes, we do need to do the works. I'm not entirely sure how much amount of work that is or how long it's going to take, but I can look up those details and let you know.
Okay, thank you.
Want to also alert members to page 52, 5.7, where there's a lifeline request of £15,000. I notice in the report that there's no business case been submitted as yet. This obviously gives me some concern because we're not sure the pros and cons here. I mean, if we have to put a lot of time and effort into marketing, for example, is it going to be cost effective? Will the customer base move to other providers if the charge is higher? Would you like to just expand on that?
Yeah, happy to do so. So obviously the overall review of the Lifeline programme is a much bigger programme of work going to be done over 2 phases. The initial phase to make some changes and efficiencies within the existing contract. The second phase is the one that the Scrutiny Committee has got on its work programme to help shape in terms of that longer term offer. In between both of those things is a necessary upgrade of the units. So the units we use at the moment are analogue. They will become obsolete and no longer will work over the next coming years. And there's that transition required across the whole country. So the reason there isn't a detailed business case, there is a business case that the team have been working on, but really the basis for this upgrade is to enable continuity of service. It's not a choice as to whether or not to continue, to make that change. It's a necessity. However, I do want to assure committee that it forms part of that wider review in terms of what the Lifeline offer is in the longer term. I can see the Chief Exec wants to come in, Councillor.
Chair, yeah, it might just be helpful. Obviously, what you've got in front of you are draft reports, which are still very much work in progress. I think the world's probably moved on a bit since the report was published, because on the 12th of January, there was an update to Cabinets about the Lifeline process and the 2-stage process that that Michelle has set out. So that might be useful if we just, we'll send a link out to that report after the meeting, might be useful to members to see, and we'll update the report before it goes to Cabinet to make sure it reflects the latest position as well.
Because obviously I'd pick that up. Yeah. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Capital strategy. I've already been over this asset management situation for a while, and for once me and Dawn agree. It's very sad that we are in a situation where we don't really still 100% control our assets, as we've seen, and we need to get into control of our assets. So I notice in this, for instance, that the cattle market car park sale is proceeding. That surely is going to be a massive, I assume, a massive asset and capital that should be in this programme. It should be in shortly in this programme, because it will make a massive difference to our capital assets, which Dawn is worried about at the moment. So we have made some progress, but and I'm looking at Ed now and he's looking back at me. I am really, really concerned that members do not have a plan, an overall plan, a 5-year plan. I hate to use the word 5-year plan, it gets so much bad track, but we need to see what's happening to places like Phoenix House and all the rest of it down in a structured plan, corporate strand for the future with our assets. We shouldn't be doing this bit by bit. It should be an overall plan of everything and where we're going, so that members can see what the flow is and comment on it. At the moment, as far as I'm concerned, it seems as though we're sort of looking at one little asset here, one there. That's not the way this should be, from my experience in another role. It should be a strategy of knowing everything we've got and which ones are the best ones, which ones are not doing their job, which ones are doing their job, which ones we should strip and get rid of, and which ones we should save. And that's the trouble at the moment. What we're doing is the car park in Cattle Market, we're getting rid of, but we haven't got an overall strategy. And that's what worries me at the moment. And I know where Ed will come back and say there is one, but that's what worries me at the moment. We really need, before we start disposing some of these assets, to think about the future and think about in a whole. For instance, I also noticed later on that we're thinking of, well, we have disposed of the extra car parking in Parkside. We've got vacant premises in Parkside at the moment, probably coming up thanks to the county council. Will we need that parking? If we get rid of that parking, I bet your bottom dollar will not get it back again, because car parking, as we know in Melton, is worth a lot of money. And I therefore am concerned that we're deciding to get rid of the extra parking by the railway station without thinking about what the future of Parkside is. And that's what one of my concerns, this overall picture doesn't seem to be there to me. We're doing things, and I'm going to say this carefully because I need to run for the door, probably in a knee-jerk reaction, not in the whole sphere, as it were. And that's what worries me. This asset project should be the biggest priority now because it's wrong. I know the housing has turned it around over the time I've been here. The same should be true of the asset surgery. Before we actually start doing things, we should be able to see the whole picture. I'm sorry I'm ranting, but it really concerns me. We're making decisions in bits, not in a whole. And then we need to make it as a whole. And that's my concern, because I know you've got an architect for the car park north and all the rest of it. And I think you've got to be careful not to asset strip in small bits without getting the whole picture. Sorry, that's a big rant, but there we go.
Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. And perhaps Pranali might want to come in a moment as well. I mean, just to give you assurance, we are having exactly the same conversations about the priority this is. I think the asset development programme is the biggest single lever this council has to support its financial sustainability. So it is absolutely front and centre of our discussions on a very regular basis. I think to give you reassurance, there are discussions we are developing with Cabinet now because we know it's so important, and they are telling us the same. It's so important to them as well. And I think we are intending to bring forward all member sessions imminently, obviously working with Scrutiny as well. And we are intending and targeting the March Council to bring a full update, because precisely the reason you describe, there are so many interdependencies. So there is not the opportunity just to do one thing often without impacting on something else. And our efforts and the ambitions set out in the asset development program are not just to asset strip and just make money. Actually, it's to serve a purpose around how do we maintain our community passion, our facilities, our ability to serve our community, support our vulnerable people. How do we do that at a time when the world has changed and our office requirements have changed? How do we evolve and adapt as an organisation? And how also do we bring in a commercial return as well, either through capital or revenue? So all of these things need to come together. There will naturally be lots of different opinions, and we will have to try and build a consensus as the council about what we're going to do, because if we can't, we'll have inertia and then we won't make progress. So there will need to be a really robust, honest debate about these competing things, and we'll need to gravitate towards a consensus. And we certainly hope to give you a really full update in March at the council meeting. So I do want to give that assurance. There is a lot of work happening, and certainly an opportunity for members to really inform and ultimately lead that debate. Pranali, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Just before we hear from Pranali, Chris, I've agreed with Pranali just before the meeting that there's a scrutiny workshop for however many members want to be on it for this very subject over the next 2 or 3 months. Is that right? Yeah, thank.
I would love to be on that committee, because to me, these assets and their use, and I'm sure the leader of the council who's here will be the future of this council. We get it right, we'll be fine. If we get it wrong, it will be a disaster. And I've seen that happen in other councils where they've got it wrong, and boy, they're left with nothing to actually help themselves with then.
Right, thank you.
Yes, just to reiterate what Ed just said is that, yes, totally agree. We do need a comprehensive plan, and believe me, we are working on a comprehensive plan, which is something we want to bring to the whole council in March, but also to the scrutiny's workshop, so we can have more interactive input from all scrutiny members into that decisions as well. I have said this before to you, Councillor, in our working group meeting, and I would say it again, that the way we have approached dealing with corporate assets is to look at Well, legacy issues, first of all, learning from the housing that we have done in the past 3 years is that let's look at the health and safety functions first, make sure that we are not putting our users and our council at risk on any of the health and safety risks and issues. So we have dealt with that first. Second thing we did is to do the condition surveys. And again, in dealing with the condition surveys, it would be too easy for us to say, oh, we need to spend this many millions over next 10 years on repair and maintenance of the assets. But again, we have taken a risk-based approach. So looked at what is it that needs attention immediately for the first year. And those are the proposals that are built into this capital program, and identified various reserves to fund that. So at least we deal with the immediate issues first. And then the wider improvement are part of the asset development program, because we know that we haven't got those kind of capital reserves within the council in place and to do all those maintenance programs over 5 years. So we have to generate capital receipts. And that's why couple of assets had been identified, which are the toilets and the North Cattle Market site, which were kind of easy to deliver because they are surplus assets, they are not being used and not essential for service delivery. And that generates that interim kind of capital injection to deal with the short to medium term issues. And that gives us time to develop the asset development program, which is the more proactive property development work and investment to generate not just capital receipts, but more long-term commercial revenue income for the council. And that's the work that we want to present to the councillors in March. And that's the work where we need input from everybody, because that's going to actually have the long-term impact and influence over how our medium-term financial strategy works. So yes, completely agree, but be assured we are bringing it to you in March.
Councillor Chandler.
I agree with Councillor Evans on a lot of what he said, and I have to disagree with you a little bit, Pranali. I remember going to the cattle market with, I think it was the chairman of the day, and it wasn't this council, it was the previous council or even the one before that, looking at that site, and we made a decision then that we would dispose of it. Nothing's happened. I mean, the only thing to our advantage is that land prices have gone up since then, so we've not lost out. But I mean, that's not the way we should be looking at these things. If we've got an asset to dispose of and to reinvest, we should be doing that, not dragging our feet, because it must be 6 or 7 years ago. I mean, it wasn't, Ed wasn't here, and the previous chief executive, it was her assistant, I think she was assistant director at the time, her title, Christine Marshall. That was who we went with. So, and we were going back a fair while now, and it's still ongoing. So I'd make my point.
I think just to respond to that point, I think if we think back 18 months to the structure that was presented and approved by council, one of the key, as well as sorting out and creating a directorate for housing, and we've seen the trajectory we've been on since we took that decision. The other key part of that restructure was to establish the corporate asset team, because we simply weren't equipped or capable or have the resources to do what you just described. So our aspirations, and if you think back to the peer challenge when I first arrived, it talked about our aspirations were not matched by our resources or ability to deliver. And so that's why we tried to take the action we have to make sure if we've got a commitment to do something, let's make sure we resource it so we can actually do it. So since the decision taken by council back in the end of 2020, there has been a lot of work being done, and that's what we want to share with you, and Pranali's team need to share with you. So I appreciate there's been false starts in the past. We are making good progress, and this is what we want to play back, and we want to be progressive. And there has been a number of disposals recently. So the toilets was recently disposed of. That's been a long-standing legacy item, not moved forward. Again, I think that the decision to dispose of those toilets was taken before I arrived. So, you know, there's things that we haven't got done, and we have to break that cycle of not getting done things we say we're going to do. And me and my team are absolutely committed to do that. Won't say we won't get to bumps in the road from time to time, we will, but I agree, we need to follow through what we say. So we will bring forward the proposal update to you, and that will set out clearly how we move this stuff forward and make sure that we do, in the way Pranali describes, actively manage our portfolio and have a more commercial focus on maximising the value of our assets, both for our community and financially.
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think our MP suggested DEFRA was coming here. Was that not right? I don't know whether there's any updates to that. But if that is the case, that was probably up here. But then DEFRA really deals with agriculture and everything green. And I wonder whether there's any area in the cattle market which we could, there are two halls, not particularly nice, one way you can get, but they're there. And I just wonder whether we aren't looking more at developing, obviously we are going to have some more houses or whatever on the cattle market site, but are we not thinking, we should be thinking out of the book. I think we should be thinking, we've got that in agriculture, we are a rural area, can we not do more in that area? If we are going to look at our assets, plus the fact, I think every councillor should see every asset that we have that could become sold or is surplus. If every councillor did that, doesn't matter, every single councillor, 28 councillors should be able to see it and have an idea of what might happen to it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That should feature as part of the workshop, Councillor Holmes, which hopefully you'll be willing to attend. Jacob, did you want to respond? Yeah.
No, Chair, we'll quickly pick up the DEFRA point just really quickly. I mean, I think all I would say is clearly we're aware of the MP's campaign. We've been very supportive of it, and we would do anything we can to bring DEFRA into Melton. It would be a fantastic coup if we can make it happen. We've made it clear that if they were interested, we would actively talk with them and look for how we could facilitate their move. I don't think it hasn't got to that stage yet. I think it's still very much a campaign. But we've made it clear that, you know, whether it's here or other places, Pier or other places in the borough, there is space and opportunity for a significant number of civil servants and ministers and others who wish to come and locate their business and their efforts outside of Melton. Would be fantastic. And as the rural capital of food, why wouldn't we want to encourage them? So yeah, it's absolutely strategically we're up for it. It's just whether they would like to come, but we would continue to invite them.
Final question on this item, then Jacob Wilkinson.
Thank you, Bob. It's linked to the toilets on Wilton Road. There's been a lot of vandalisation recently of those toilets, and I just, probably not really linked to this, but I just wondered what measures the council is taking to kind of prevent that from happening so much on a regular basis. Particularly, they are really the only main public toilets in town now.
Well, a few things we are doing and we can do. One thing is we are looking at more secured way of securing those paying machines, because they are the main attractor for vandalism, because that's what people are targeting for a small amount of change. So yeah, looking at proper kind of more hardcore way of securing that is the first step. Second thing, we are looking at increasing vigilance in the area. So we're talking to the police, and we know that police are using Wilton Road car park as their base. So when they are between calls, they are using that to park their cars and be around. So that increases vigilance and surveillance in the area. So that could stop things. We have a caretaker visiting the site about 8 o'clock to make sure that in the evening, if something has happened, we pick it up before the end of the day closing as well. So that there is again the staff presence around 8 o'clock to catch anything we can. And another thing we are doing is just talking to our partners through Community Safety Partnership and our bid business network to make sure that anybody is around, any of the partners are around in the evening, that time, then they provide that information and surveillance and report back to us so we can act on it quite quickly. So yeah, it is an issue. It's not something we can completely avoid, because that's the nature of crime within the area. But by working with partners, we can hope to provide more surveillance, reduce the crime level, and look at more secured way of keeping those pay machines stuck to the wall. So that's the plan.
I just wondered, with the main attraction being the cash payment system we have now, can the council look at a cashless solution in terms of paying for the toilets?
It's 30 pence per use. So looking at getting a card payment or something that wouldn't be commercially viable. We are looking at whether, there are 2 or 3 different things here. One, people are targeting the pay machines, but also we know that there is illegal use of the toilets for drug use, and we have installed blue lights and those kind of mechanisms to catch those things out. But there is that attractions for kind of breaking the door, and that's easily done by breaking the pay machine. So there is, yes, one attraction is the pay machine itself, but another one is illegal use of the facility itself. So both things are linked but kind of separate. So yes, we can look at cashless payments, which are, we know that not commercially viable. We can look at not taking payments because it's costing us a lot to just keep repairing it. Or also we can work with partners to make sure that the crimes just reduce or don't happen. That will be the ideal situation. So I think at this point in time, we are working on all different areas to see what happens. But if the situation doesn't change in 6 months' time, we may have to take a radical decision on that, but hoping it will improve.
Okay, that concludes the debate on item 5. The recommendation is that the Scrutiny Committee notes the report and provides all the comments made tonight to Cabinet for them to consider. We'll now move on to the final item, item 6. And there's a very short presentation, I think, from the Treasurer. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So moving on to the housing revenue account, the proposals in front of members are for an average rent increase of just over 4%, and that's in line with government policy, which is for CPI plus 1%. The working balance is maintained at the agreed level of 750,000, and any surpluses or deficits are adjusted by transfers to and from the reserves. There's a capital programme proposed of just over 4.6 million. But I think what's important to note is obviously we're in the latter stages of the development of the housing revenue account business plan, which has been much awaited and will be coming in front of members shortly. So that could impact on plans in the year. And certainly that's why you've only got a 1-year capital programme in front of you. Because we need that HRA business plan to give that much longer term view. In terms of the various reserves and balances that housing revenue accounts got, the estimates for the end of 22-23 would be for a major repairs reserve of just over 2.6 million. And that's almost that's the main resources that come into the council for the development and maintenance of the council's housing stock. There's a regeneration and development reserve of just over 3 million, capital receipts of 728,000, and as I said, the working balance of 750. They do look fairly generous when you look at those in the context of what we've been discussing in terms of the general fund. But what's key to this is the HRA business plan and sustainability of the HRA over the next 30 years, and obviously the stock condition surveys that will feed into that. And so that will show and demonstrate whether the adequacy of the reserves or otherwise, and how the council is able to not just maintain decent home standards, but also meet any tenants' aspirations. And as part of that business plan, one of the things I want to review as well is the sufficiency of the target HRA working balance of 750k. So I'll review that as well as part of that HRA business plan. Thank you.
Just to update members, we were going to receive the draft HRA business plan at a special scrutiny workshop on the 22nd of February. I've now been told earlier today that that is not achievable. It does go to cabinet, I believe, on the 13th of April. So somehow, for it to come to scrutiny, we've got to get a date in March, and Michelle is going to see Pam Wharf tomorrow or before the end of the week to see whether we can actually scrutinise it, because it's no good it coming to scrutiny a week before, because we may have comments and it may need to be changed. So well, that's the latest on that. Okay, Michelle.
So yeah, just to build on that. So just to make sure, what's really important is that we know this is a really important piece of work. It's a really important programme for a really long time for this council. It's really important that members have a proper opportunity to scrutinise and ask the relevant questions and be assured of the plans that are in place for the future, particularly given some of the challenges historically that we've had. So because we know, as we've discussed at a previous scrutiny committee, there have been delays in receiving the stock condition data. We just want to make sure that we review that whole timeline so that we've got a proper process for decision making that can genuinely be informed by that scrutiny. So we will make sure that we consult with the chair of the scrutiny committee to agree that revised timeline. But absolutely important that there is that really meaningful scrutiny and engagement with our residents as well, which is really key and is ongoing at the moment. I do have an update in terms of the stock conditions survey, which I'm happy to give members some information on at an appropriate time this evening as well, Chair.
Right, any comments, members, to this report? Councillor Evans.
Okay, I've forewarned Michelle about this before, and I haven't forewarned Ronan. The capital, you had a budget of 4 million to spend. You've spent 2 million. So your 2 million has not been invested this year for our residents. Now, I know it's not easy. I know COVID has not made it easy, but this 2 million, we've been through the history of this. This is a long history of this in Melton. We've got the money. We've got the problems. I'm going to be blunt and say, how do I know that next year the 4 million or whatever capital assets, I don't know whether Ronan or Michelle's got to come back at me here, but we can't carry on like this, surely. 50% of the capital we identified as a council last year has not been spent. That means people haven't got new windows, haven't got new radiators, haven't got new heating. I know there are issues, I'm sure they are, but we need to be reality here. We need a reality check. Can you assure us that this will not happen again? That's what I suppose the scrutiny team has to say, because there's no point in us approving this for 4 million next year and you spend 1 million of it. We need to be able to say to the residents, we are moving heaven and earth to make certain you haven't got the poor heating, you've got the windows which are losing and all the rest of it. And it hasn't happened this year.
You took the words out of my mouth. You've took the words out of my mouth, Chris. I've gone back 6 years, and certainly the last 6 years in total, we have underspent £22.5 million. 22.5. In 1920, it was over 8 million. Oh, it winds me up, this does. Because we've got decent homes below standard. Are the budget holders just coming up with a figure off the top of the head? Have they been to training which is provided? I know the assistant directors reviewed these budgets, and what were the findings really? It cannot go on, Chris. And you know, it's just, do they really understand budget process?
If I can come in, Chair, and then Michelle, if you could follow for me, because you'll have a bit more detail than the overview, is that I think Dawn alluded to the fact we need a business plan, and that's absolutely key to where we invest our stock. I'll take some responsibility in this, where I've said to the officers that we need to be putting the money into where we actually need it. We don't want to be spending hundreds of thousands or millions of pounds in areas that we don't need it. And that's why we need the data from the stock condition survey, and the officers have done that. I have today had a sort of a final briefing with Chris Flannery, and basically who's the repairs manager. And basically there's 4.6 million, whatever it is, for next year. It's all going to start April. We do have some problems with contractors, and this is a national issue, that needs to be addressed. In the fact that one is that we have to look at how we manage our day-to-day contractor and how we make sure that we're doing things in a value for money way, but we actually have the skilled staff to be able to do that. That's not unique to Melton. This is something across the whole sector at the moment, where you can't get enough skilled gas engineers, you can't get enough skilled bricklayers, etc. And there's going to have to be some tough decisions as well, probably made around what we pay these contractors as well. So that'll have to come back at some stage, and certainly initially with us in cabinet. The other issue is a proper robust plan where everybody knows what they're doing and actually cost it up properly, as Councillor Childs said. And the key thing this year that I asked to be done was our compliance work, to make sure our properties were safe, because we had some significant gaps in our landlord health and safety, mainly around fire risk, around stuff like compartmentation, electrics, gas, etc. And the team have delivered that, and that's now 100%. There has been a few issues with retaining staff, etc. And we've got an outflow. And again, that's a sector-wide issue. At the moment, if you want a job in housing, there's lots of opportunities for people, and people are taking those opportunities. That's left a few gaps, especially in the repair service. So the team, and Michelle come on in a minute, is they're working up innovative ways to look at career grading for posts and various things to attract people to the stay in situ. But the message that I've given the officers is that basically we spend the whole 4.6 million this year. We sort out access, our main contractor, which we are doing, and that's not about beating them over the head with a stick. That's actually about coming in together and collaboratively working about how we can better work together, because we know out there the tenants have come to us and said there are issues. That's not ignored, and engage properly and listen to it. And we've been listening to our tenants over the last few months, and there's some real exciting stuff going to happen around rebranding our tenant offer, giving our tenants much more availability to get involved and actually scrutinise this and have a say, etc. And to finalise this, I completely agree with you, Councillor Child, is that we need, if we set a budget, we need to spend it, and that's the message that's been given to the officers for the forthcoming financial year. And I thank everybody for the comments. But Michelle, do you want to just follow up on what I've just said in a bit?
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Just before you say, that's reassuring to all of us here to hear that we're going to be there or thereabouts with the spending, because it's certainly got to improve massively.
Thank you. Yeah, really happy to build on that. And I think it's worth reflecting back on the journey the council has been on since the introduction of the housing improvement plan, that improvement to compliance, and there's been the work with Scrutiny committee recently in terms of the progress that's been made, and that initial assessment of the stock condition data as well. We know that COVID has an issue. We know that staffing changes have had an issue, but it's really important that they're not an excuse for us, and that we really focus on delivering for the future. And I'm confident that that, the teams are really up for that challenge, and they're really excited and enthused about that as well, actually. Obviously, we've got the HRA business plan is a really, really big deal for this council. That scrutiny, as I say, will need to be really meaningful. And there are a number of other elements coming together which help us to really bring that to life. And one of those, as Councillor Brown says, is our new tenant engagement framework, because one of the most important things that we need to do over the coming years is listen to our tenants, hear what they're telling us, and actually do something about that, and actually make sure that our tenants are feeling empowered to tell us when things aren't right as well. So it was a real new era for housing, and I'm really excited about that journey, and I absolutely know our teams are committed there. One of the initial things that has come from our tenants when we've asked them questions is they are concerned about repairs. They are concerned about being able to report and know that their homes continue to be safe. There'll be a number of assurance or service improvement groups established, and one of the main topics of those will be around repairs and condition of homes. A couple of other things I want to pick up on, if that's okay, Chair, just around the stock condition survey, because obviously that's a really key piece of work. I've got it in front of me, it's just arrived. So I can confirm that we have had 1,461 surveys carried out, which is 81.1% of the stock that we have. The remaining unsurveyed properties are not through a lack of trying, they are unfortunately due to access issues, and those properties will be revisited in the summer. We have got some indicative costs now for 30-year business plans, so our assistant director and team are looking to then reprofile that, so that having got a best estimate for the 1-year budget that's in front of you this evening, we can then have those proper plans in place. But the other thing I just wanted to pick up on, because I think this is really important, is just being able to give some assurance that our tenants are not at risk currently. So we've got a number of different assessments that have been done within the stock condition survey, and one of those is around the decent home standard, and looking at any specific hazards. So when we look at hazards, they're in certain categories based on their severity and the level of risk. So in terms of category 1 hazards, which are the most serious, they're the ones that we need to respond to immediately. There are no properties that have been found during the stock condition survey to have any of those category 1 hazards. And I think that's a really important message to share as we move forward. We want to keep it that way. And where we have identified issues, whether they've come through complaints or disrepair claims or anything like that, we have addressed them. We've addressed them quickly and proactively, and it's absolutely right that we should do so. When we come to the sort of the second level of that standard, so category B, we found that we've got 41 properties that are failing, and some of those fails are in relation to boilers, kitchen amenities, heating systems and external doors. And then we found 13 properties that have failed on the third level of that standard. So, we've got a really good understanding, and the type of, the level of detail that this stock condition survey goes into is it breaks down every element that we need to look at, and it's profiled for us every year how much we'll need to spend, how many properties we need to invest in. That's the level of detail that will be in this business plan, and that's why we can give you that assurance. We've not had that opportunity before. So I think, from an officer perspective, give us that chance to come back to you with that business plan and the most detail that we will have been able to provide for a really long time. And then linked to that, we're also doing everything we can to make sure that our staff have the best possible opportunity to deliver and to grow in Melton as well. Ed and I had a really helpful discussion with our housing teams yesterday, and that enthusiasm to be part of this journey is really clear. So I'll stop there, but Ed, I don't know if there's anything more you want to say on that, given the journey you had before my arrival as well.
I think Ronan's done a great job, and you have, of just reflecting where we are. I think it all falls to me to mean what we say. We've made a real big commitment to housing. We're setting budgets now that I think are more realistic and are linked absolutely to our stock. It's up to us to deliver it, and we're absolutely committed to do that. So I think we can all give that reassurance. We're all on the same page, and we want to see it delivered because it's such a priority for us.
Are there any questions, Councillor Evans?
I shouldn't make it sound as though in any way I don't think this is an easy area. I know housing more than anything in a council, from my experience, is hell. I'm sorry, it is hell because of what you're dealing with, which is not easy. So the one thing I should say to both Ronan and Michelle, I back you 100% to get us out of this. When it is a road, as Ed knows, that was awful only a few years ago, unbelievable, unacceptable, and we're stepping forward and we're moving. So you do need to know you have 100% support. Could I ask two things? My concern in the back of my mind is, I'm concerned when 20% or thereabouts of the stock is not accessible to us for survey. I think you said something near 19%. Let's get it front. Because obviously that means for whatever reason, our officers cannot get into that property, and that worries me because I know as a landlord, and I am a landlord, I have the right to get into a property within a certain period, whether it's a month or like if I give notice. Why are we not getting in there? Because in my mind, once again, these are the ones that might well be at risk or have problems. And that worries me. And could I also say the one thing that we mustn't forget as a council, and it makes me emotive because I've seen it only 2 days ago, homelessness. We must make certain we don't forget that in this area, we're not just dealing with tenants, we're dealing with people who don't have a voice. And as has been pointed out in the report, it's going to, in the next year, get worse and worse. Can I have an assurance that that will be your top priority? Because in my opinion, people who don't have a home are the ones who first we have to look at. Then we go on to the tenants. That will always be my view. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Really good points. And I can absolutely assure you that the safety and the needs of our residents and those who need us most are absolute priority for us as well. So, both in terms of making sure people have access to homes, that we support them to sustain those tenancies, that when they have them, and that we really look at the links between all of our services. And there are lots of different pieces of work that are coming together which contribute to this. For example, the review of the housing allocations policy, a review of our wider people offers to understand how do we better link our housing options teams and our case management teams, for example. So all of those things come together to make sure we can give that better service to residents. In terms of access to properties, so there is a sort of a standard approach to the number of times that we can ask a contractor to go. Obviously, we will always try to encourage. We've done an awful lot of that encouragement. That work will be continuing in the background. And ultimately, as you'll know, there is a process that we need to follow in order to gain access. So we will continue to be doing that work. I'm really happy that when we bring the HRA business plan back to this committee, we give a more detailed breakdown of what we are doing in terms of those other properties. Because like you, my concern is they could well be the properties where we find some of those challenges, and absolutely we want to understand those. Again, we've got our tenant engagement lead really working closely with us on this, so that as part of it, we are always encouraging our residents to have a voice, and we've not always had that opportunity to do that in the way that we need to do in the future. The other thing I do just want to pick up, which I didn't say, is that we have got some real expertise leading this programme of work from an officer perspective, which can give us that confidence as well. So all of those things coming together give us the best chance of succeeding with this programme. But always happy to take any questions. And if there are areas of focus that the committee would like when we bring that business plan forward, please do let me know, and I'll make sure that we really do give you that chance to ask us some detailed questions on that, because it's important we get this right.
Chandler.
Thank you. Take a point that Councillor Brown said about liaising better with our tenants. Is TFEC still in existence? Because I used to be called in the first Monday of every month to meet with TFEC, and then it was all of a sudden stopped, and I never knew what happened to TFEC. I mean, it was a talking shop and not a lot was achieved, I think. But
Michelle will respond to that question.
Thank you. So yes, TFEC's got a really long and proud history with Melton, and has clearly done an awful lot of good in Melton as well over the last few years. We enter a bit of a new era and a new phase in terms of tenant engagement, and that's triggered largely by the new white paper in terms of the Charter for Social Housing Residents. And so we've worked with all of our tenant groups, including TFEC, to look at how do we move into that new era, and they've given us some feedback and advice about actually how we can better engage. Also, we've got reducing numbers as part of TFEC in particular. I think we were down to four members most recently. And actually all of those members have taken the decision that now, as we enter this new phase, is the time to step away from that and either support us in the sort of our new tenant engagement framework, or to step away proudly and quite rightly so. So a new era, but TFEC will be ceasing to exist and disband, and those members will step away. But I'll hand over to Councillor Brown for any final words on that, if you would like to, because I know that they've had a big impact.
Yeah, cheers, Pro. Yeah, I think I've probably been with most of you, certainly with you through the whole journey of tenant engagement, and it went through a really good strong phase and then dipped down in the last number of years, was a bit like the housing service did at the time. However, we do need to do it differently. The world's changed, and basically the charter for social tenants that's the government will release is going to put a lot more of an onus, quite rightly so, upon all social landlords, and local authorities will have much more scrutiny than they're used to. So housing associations get quite a lot of scrutiny, but we're going to have standards and key performance indicators that we're going to have to agree with our tenants and report to our tenants and then report to the regulator, right? And we don't have to do all of that at the moment, or other than a few key issues. But what it does is it gives us an opportunity to get in and look at specific areas. So I know that the team are looking at, there's been scrutiny over this budget, and they've had a group of tenants in for that who wouldn't have normally been involved, some of them, and they're going to do it around repairs, and they're going to do it around other things. And I myself, with the officers and with the ward members, I know that Councillor Illingworth and Jacob, Councillor Wilkinson, is going to come with me on the 24th, and we're going to do a bit of door knocking. I believe the leaders coming with us, and we're going to start us as members getting out there and showing and giving the officers a bit of support to say, actually, we do care, and we do care what you're doing. And I need to talk to Councillor Douglas, because I'm hoping to do the same on the 23rd in the town centre flats. And what that is let's see what the tenants are saying to us, and let's bring that back, as you quite rightly, as we did in the summer when we went out to Bottisford and we looked at things there, and actually make it meaningful, not just lip service, actually, because we will come across stuff, as Michelle has said, with the people who don't let us in. There'll be a reason for that. It's the profession I work in. We'll come across all sorts of things, but what we should be doing is helping people, raise their aspirations, or if they've got difficulty access services that they need to help them through their lives. But anybody who wants to get involved and come in with any ideas, there'll be opportunity for all members in all wards to do that. And I want you involved, because it's your wards. My role is to coordinate it. You'll see it on the doorstep day to day.
I think the final question tonight falls with Jacob.
Thank you, Chair. Just in the report, there's a section here about Fairmead regeneration. I'm not sure whether there's an underspend there. It's not quite clear to me. But I just wondered if there's any more detail on that and what's been involved in that. If anybody knows. 111.
Is this, I assume that was done, before Michelle's time, and that was kept for doing all the initial feasibility and design work for Fairmead estate. So I assume that's the legacy work that's already in there. But there was, if you remember, there was a plan 5 years ago for the whole regeneration of Fairmead estate, which needs to be revisited in the current context, and particularly the whole engagement with the tenants. And if we are going for the wider construction works on the site, then what happens with the decanting of those people and the disruption to their lives and all that? So it required a whole review of the original plan, and that's what that money was for, but it needs to be taken.
Caveat, not Councillor Wilkinson, is I do have concerns about the viability of being able to deliver that, considering that the pressures that we have around homelessness, and if you have to decant a larger number of people, those houses are pretty sound inside, they're good houses. So from that perspective, it's the layout, but we're dealing with a legacy thing that was built in the an estate that was built in the late 70s, 1980s, and I want to sit down with the officers, that's okay, and involve you as ward councillors and look at what's really viable and what's not, because depending on what comes out of the business plan, we need the money going into existing stock and also maybe delivering some new stock. Well, not maybe, we will be delivering new stock, but so I don't want to be wasting money on good, existing, well-built traditional housing if we don't have to, if that's okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Holmes.
We're talking about this money. Does it go into youth services as well, because housing and youth services, surely. I don't know whether anybody saw a programme the other morning about how we are neglecting young people in our towns and in our villages. And I just don't know whether any money can come from HR for these, because if we have that money, we shouldn't be getting fair meat clothes. We should have somebody being able to look after these. It is vital for young people to actually have somewhere to go, say once a week. We are not looking after the young people in this town. You say we get a lot of vandalism to the loos and things like that. Give young people a chance. I think it is vital. I don't know whether there's anything within the HR budget to help young people.
Did you want to respond, Dawn, on that? Or I mean, it's not part of the HRA, Councillor Holmes. No, it's ring fenced, the HRA. So youth services would fall within a different area.
Okay, yeah, just to pick up on that. So yeah, the HRA is ring fenced and very carefully guarded and ring fenced as well. And it's really, there are some really strict rules to how we can use that. So and that's one thing that I will just say actually in terms of that, because members may have seen the increased scrutiny that's likely as a result of some of the challenges in Nottingham around use of the HRA. One of the things that we will be doing over the next few months is ensuring that all of our officers, including myself, and I know as portfolio holder Councillor Brown was interested in this, just making sure that we're trained and we're refreshed in terms of how the HRA can and cannot be used, so we don't fall foul of that. But the matter around young people obviously is something that came from the State of Melton debate, and I know is something that we've picked up as part of that in terms of what we do with it, you know, the general fund, but the HRA is very specifically got to be linked back to our tenancies.
Thank you. I knew that really.
And I'm going to be on that training as well.
Yes,
yep,
yes.
that's right. The final recommendation is that Scrutiny Committee notes the report and provides comments to Cabinet for them to consider. I think as there's no other business, I'd like to thank
Can I just ask, the next meeting is about community and policing, and whether the committee could write to the Police and Crime Commissioners and invite him to attend?
There is some delay on that one. I think it's going to be programmed for June or July. Okay. So it's thank you all to the officers. Thank you for members attending and members of the Cabinet for sitting there patiently in the gallery and listening to us. So it's at 8:43, the meeting is closed. Thank you.